Good morning and welcome to Skipton Baptist Church online. It's great to have you joining us again. We hope you find these online content really a real blessing and encouragement. If you can let us know by emailing office@skiptonbaptist.org, it'd be great to know how often you watch it and for what reasons and what benefit it is to you as we assess and think about what we do with our online content. Now, today is it's my last Sunday before I start my sabbatical on the 1st of June. And when we were planning the sermon series over the past number of weeks, we noticed that we'd finished Romans. We'd celebrated Pentecost and heard lots of sharing of stories, God's stories with one another. And we had a blank space before we do our next series. So I thought I'd share something about sabbatical. Now, for those who are not sure what we do in sabbatical, certainly for the Baptist Church here, it's a practice of every around 7 years of ministry, the church releases a minister for a set amount of time, usually around about 3 months, from the responsibilities and duties of weekly church leadership and ministering. And different people do different things at this time. Some people do complete PhD theses, others go on retreat, write a book, others do training or lots of other things, and it involves rest. It may involve holidays. I can explain different things about what I'll be doing if you want to ask me, but it'll involve those kind of things: rest, retreat, and reading, certainly. And sabbaticals, they actually find their basis in the practices of Leviticus 23. And in this situation, God commands the people of Israel that every 7 years, the land is to be left fallow and uncultivated in order for it to rest and restore itself. And anything that grows in that time belonged to anyone, the stranger, the poor. It was not to be accumulated and sold. It was a period of rest and recovery and blessing. But at the root of the idea of sabbatical is actually the practice of Sabbath. And this is something we might be more familiar with, the idea of Sabbath, the day of rest and all that. And I thought I would like to explore that today in a bit more detail. Now, the Sabbath originally within Judaism was the Saturday, still is for Jews, and latterly with Christianity and has expanded into the kind of Gentile areas, it was celebrated on Sunday, the day of the Lord's resurrection. Now, I don't know what your experiences of Sabbath days, Sundays, or days of rest were growing up. I have to confess, in some senses, mine were pretty negative. There just seemed to be lots of nots, lots of do not do this, do not do that. And if I could sum up my feelings around Sundays growing up, it's probably captured by this image, and that is Thor a Herd. And all those kind of Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening programs of hymn-based, ever sincere, lovely, inoffensive, and, frankly, for a teenage boy, certainly pretty boring. And I loved church, and still the Lord's Day seemed pretty boring. Not so now, with Sunday trading allowed and 24/7 entertainment and working hours extended. It's no longer necessarily boring, is it? It's just like another day with all the opportunities that day can bring. But I wonder if something has been lost. Even in the church, the idea and practice of Sabbath keeping is much less prominent, maybe even just having lip service paid to it, as one day pretty much matches every other in the constant bombardment of attention-grabbing distractors keen to give us every experience we want and desire. We still, as a society, have a pervading sense of restlessness. Now, have a look at this list of two lists of words. One is about restfulness and one reflects restlessness. And as it comes up, have a look at the words. Which of these lists most describe your world, your life, your experience, and the world around us? Is it margin-filled or is it busyness? Is it quiet or is it noisy? Is there delight or distraction? Is there gratitude or is there greed? Is there a sense of slowness or a sense of manic hurriedness? Because work and busyness is almost like a currency of importance and significance today, isn't it? How often when we speak to people and ask, how are you? How was your week? The response so often is, really busy, so much to do, so little time, stressful, busy, work. and just not enough time. Any other answer sometimes is met with varied responses, verbalized or not. I had a number of interesting responses from people when I've told them that I was going on sabbatical. And there was lots of encouraging words and stuff, but there were also those of things like, oh, that will be nice. You're very lucky. Not everyone can do that. It's nice for you. But what will you do with all that time? I bet you've got a long list of jobs that needs doing. There was often a mixture of incredulity, judgment, and indeed jealousy, which actually made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I spoke with someone just the other day which demonstrated our warped sense of work and busyness. He was talking with me about the fact he had to stop work because of the demands and the hours and the stress we're placing upon him. Now, he'd been working regularly for about, each week, 55, 65-hour week. And he told me that he would meet people who would say, yeah, I work full time, and explain their working week was 35 to 40 hours. And he'd ask, whether in his head or out loud, well, what do you do from Wednesday lunchtime onwards? This kind of sense of, I'm working more hours, therefore I've got a greater sense of worth. You're working less, therefore you are worth less than me. When I refer to work, and as I will be referring to work, I'm not just talking about paid employment or even voluntary employment. It's that regular busyness of our weekly schedules of things that we have to do, the demands on our times. And there is an obsession with being productive, isn't there? Or at least seeming busy and therefore worthy. And this has had its impact on us. We're more stressed, more anxious, more exhausted in all aspects of our lives, more materialistic than perhaps at any other point in history. Psychologist Paul Tournier describes our culture at this time as experiencing universal fatigue. And the writer A.J. Swoboda writes, we have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, and spiritually malnourished people in history. Do you recognize those descriptions, those pictures of what our culture is like? Because this is where Sabbath comes in. Now, trust me, I am absolutely confessing and owning up to the sheer hypocrisy of me giving this message. Before anyone who knows me writes in, interrupts, comments, or even rolls their eyes on listening, this message is for at least one person, and that one person is me. If it helps you to, Lord bless you. Otherwise, let's just go along for the ride. Because we need Sabbath. I need Sabbath. We need Sabbath. We're just not great at doing it. From the reading in Mark chapter 2, we see Jesus in trouble with the religious authorities about the Sabbath. In fact, if you see a lot of Mark's gospel, a lot of the gospel, you see Jesus was often in conflict with the religious authorities about Sabbath, because it was one of the key distinctives of the Jewish people. And out of fear of breaking that fourth commandment about the Sabbath, the religious teachers established a huge list of what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. 1,500 plus rules, in fact. You couldn't prepare a meal, you couldn't light a fire, you couldn't walk under a kilometer, for more than under a kilometer from your home. Whereas Jesus healed on the Sabbath, he cast out demons on the Sabbath, he picked corn when he and his disciples were hungry. So many times Jesus' clash with the authorities located itself around the Sabbath. And then as we look at Mark chapter 2, there are two extremes for us. And there's the lax extreme. There's those who just don't do it. There's no need, not under law, don't think it's relevant, or we don't need to do it. We're more important things to do with our time. Or there's the legalistic response, which is, this is just a set of rules upon rules of what we can and cannot do to actually meet God's criteria. And Jesus' answer is so powerful in Mark 2, 27 to 28, when he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So to those who are lax, it's a reminder that the Sabbath was a gift from God for the benefit and well-being of humanity, that we need it, and even God rested. And to the legalistic, a reminder that humanity was not made for religious observance, but for relationship, that we live in freedom, not fear. But as is such a demonstration of the warpedness of humanity, this gift of God of Sabbath rest, we either turn the blessing into a burden or we ignore it altogether. The Sabbath is something which was God exemplified in the beginning, hardwired into humanity, commanded twice by God, warned through the prophets about not Sabbathing, and Jesus even had to correct its use. We still got it and we still get it wrong. So what is this Sabbath all about? Now, there's lots that can be and has been said and taught about Sabbath and keeping this Sabbath, but today I want to focus on just three aspects of Sabbath found in the original document in Genesis chapter 2, and in the commands of Exodus and Deuteronomy, and in the life of Jesus. The first thing is that in Genesis chapter 2 it says, by the seventh day God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day, made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Sabbath goes way back beyond Jesus, beyond the Ten Commandments, right back to the very origins of everything. And the word that's used here in Genesis for rested is Shabbat, and it literally means to stop. So God stopped, freed from the need to keep going and going and going, stopped. And so we're encouraged to stop working, to stop wanting, to even perhaps stop worrying. All these things will still be there on the other side of Sabbath. And in fact, we may well or will be better able to handle them in the light of Sabbath rest. Because there is an ache for this kind of stopping full life. Just think about advertising, lifestyle advertising at the moment. The couple in a crisp, clean bed, relaxedly drinking their hipster coffee in the morning in dappled sunlight. Those staring into the middle distance of a sunset on a bench, eating, the latest Munchables, The picture-perfect picnic in the park with a tartan blanket wicker basket and M&S quality Lunchables. The new sofa, the new detergent, lawnmowers, coffee, fluffy dressing gowns. Nearly all those kind of images are images of an idealized stopping. They are images of Sabbath. And marketeers and advertisers know that our soul aches for this kind of stopping in our lives because they ache for it too. And they have that need. But in order to experience this need, there's a price tag slapped on it. Ironically, you need to buy whatever that they're advertising with money earned from working hard to get that experience of resting. But Sabbath shouts, stop. It shouts enough to the relentless pace of life, demands on our time, attention, and resources. And it is so countercultural at this time that the Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann famously said that Sabbath is actually an act of resistance, a rebellion against drivenness, desire, increasing acquisition of things and stuff in pursuit of the thing, the goal which our culture is actually acting against, restfulness. J. John writes that the Sabbath makes a statement about who we are and who we serve. It says who's in charge of our life. Sabbath dethrones work and obsessive productivity, achievement, and drivenness. I remember a little bit of illustration about this whenever I did exams in GCSEs and A-levels, and I had a particular exam technique. And whenever they said, right, you can turn your exam paper over, I wouldn't do it. Not at least for 10 seconds. I'd sit there while others manically got stuck into paper, turning the paper over and got stuck into question 1. 10 seconds of stop. Breathe. I would pray. And then in my time, I would turn over the paper. The paper didn't control me. I controlled it. And it was only 10 seconds, and it was a small thing which helped my frame of mind. And it also caused those around me to panic, wondering if they'd missed something that I knew. I'm encouraged, I don't know about if you've heard about a gentleman called Gary Grant. He was the person who founded the Entertainer chain of toy shops. And he from the very outset of becoming a Christian in his business, he decided to not open on Sundays, even when it kind of would count against him in seeking properties to actually open up his shops. And he says he does this because for him, taking a break from work that once a week, actually prioritizing family time and mental health, helps employees achieve a better work-life balance. He says that research has shown that having a good work-life balance leads to increased job satisfaction, better physical and mental health, and in fact, improved productivity. He has responses from his over 2,000 staff saying that having that day off is really important of them, regardless of their theological or Christian belief. Having that sense of break values them and actually enhances their productivity and well-being. So Sabbath is to stop the chaos, stop the manicness, and to claim that God is king, not economics or even productivity. The second picture is Sabbath. It says that God rested. That's the word that we have with God's rested, a day of rest. So the question is, was God tired? Well, not at all. Isaiah 40:28 says, God does not tire. Psalm 121 says he neither slumbers nor sleeps. But for us, life is full on, isn't it? The gift of work, the gift of life, due to the fall, according to Genesis 3, is warped and becomes a toil, tiring, and resource sapping. We are finite beings. We have our limits. And as many people say, work is never done. It's rarely done. There will always be something else that you remember needs doing. It's ironic that in a day and age of technological progress, which decades ago promised to decrease labour problems and increase leisure, actually has lent itself to an increase in business demands and stress. The ping of the mobile phone grabs our attention more than the person physically sat opposite us. Devices providing entertainment and enjoyment also are means of carrying the office around with us, literally carting around our workload in digital form of emails, messages, rotas, and other things. Advertisements and social media blogs remind us of the life we don't yet have but could do if we buy this or that in order to get the same experiences of these others that we're missing out on. The pressure is full on. Where are the margins? Where are the breathing spaces? If you have a look at a document, one that has no margins, it's too much for us. It's hard to orientate, to follow, easy to lose our place and understand. It's too much to take in. And I wonder whether that is a picture of what our lives are often like without these margins, these spaces. The need for margin, the need for rest. And resting is not idleness or laziness. It's not just lying around snoozing, not just a day off. On a day off, there are still multiple demands, catching up on household needs, chores, and errands not done during the week. And rest is restoration from the previous week and recharging, reinvigorating for the week ahead. It's interesting that at the very start in the creation story of Genesis, in day 6, God creates humanity, the pinnacle of his creation, and then he steps back and sees that it's very good, and then he rests, setting up that pattern for us to follow. So if you look at it, the first full day of humanity is one of rest, a day spent in the presence of God. Not rest as recovery from the wear and tear of work and struggle, but a place to work from. I want to really highly recommend a book called Working from a Place of Rest by Tony Horsfall. I've recommended it to a number of people and seen it make a real difference. And his idea is that we work from that place of rest rather than working for rest. I know plenty of people for whom they literally work every hour that they can find to get enough money in order to have that ideal holiday. They literally work for their holidays, often crawling towards that time off. Day of rest is not meant to be rewarding, it's meant to be rewiring. There are lots of re's around it: restore, revive, recover, reinvigorate, refresh, recharge. These lots of re's are about restoring to what once was, restoring the default, the origin. And that origin is a place of rest, restfulness, a place of shalom in the presence of God. J. John writes about one doctor who said that the periods of rest that he prescribes for his patients are often Sabbaths in arrears. We're not great at this, are we? Even look at some of the most familiar words. Psalm 23, so familiar. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. Soul restoring. Are you up for that? Notice even in this really well-known slice of Psalm 23, God has to make me lie down. I'm not liable to do it myself. Resting, restoring well. What does it look like? There's an attentiveness that's needed to a holistic rest. Now, many of you may, hopefully, remember a series that we did, a teaching series in 2022. It was called Holistic, but with a capital W, where we looked at Jesus' command in Mark 12 to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I think that it was one of the most significant series of teachings we've done, actually, because of its far-reaching impact in our lives and lifestyles. If we really try to embrace it, I would encourage you to go back and look at it. But this sense of using it as a basis of how we rest, resting in our heart emotionally, building on relationships with others, resting in our soul, a spiritual resting, investing in our relationship with God. More on that in just a moment. Resting in our mind mentally, stilling our mind from the worries and troubles that we keep on reflecting on, and filling our thinking with good things, investing in good things that will fill our minds. And resting in strength, yes, physical rest, recovery, refueling, and doing things which energize us and not take energy away from us. So is your Sabbathing attentive to these four areas? If not, I believe part of our lives are missing out on the full rest that God wants for us. The third aspect of Sabbath or Shabbat in that original passage in Genesis, Shabbat can also be translated not just as rest or stopping, but to delight in. And I've paraphrased this: donuts, not do nots. Each day in the creation story, at the end, God stops and steps back and sees it was good. He had a daily delight in what he did. Now, I don't know, again, what your experiences of Sabbaths have been. I shared how mine were, and I even liked them. But there is that connotation of Sabbath being restrictive, whereas the original intent was one of delight, enjoyment, celebration of satisfaction. It was never meant to be negative. It was and always has been intended to be a blessing, a gift to us for our well-being. And only us rebellious humans need commanding from God to enjoy his gift. It says in Exodus 20, it says, remember the Sabbath day, because we're inclined to forget it, to get caught up in other things. In Deuteronomy 5, a different context, 40 years later, as Moses gives out the laws, he says, observe the Sabbath. Don't forget to rest as God intended. Do something to mark it out, to make it distinctive. It was never meant to be boring. Even today, the Jewish Sabbath is located around a shared meal of feasting and celebrating. Dan Allender, the Christian counselor and author, in his book Sabbath, had this to say: the Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question or thought, 'tis the best day of the week. Sabbath is the holy time where we feast, play, dance, have sex, sing, pray, laugh, tell stories, read, paint, walk, and watch creation in all its fullness. Few people are willing to enter the Sabbath and sanctify it, to make it holy, because a full day of delight and joy is more than most people can bear in a lifetime, let alone a week. We are told to delight. God delighted in his creation, in his work. We're told to delight in the world around us that he has given us, to delight in our life within it and with others. We're told to delight with God. And this is really key. Genesis 2:3, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. A Sabbath day of rest is meant to include delight in the Lord, worship. Now, this is not necessarily a sing-along a hill song, although it can include that. God made the day holy, not a place. He made a day, literally meaning set apart, made special, located around him and what he has done. In Exodus 20, it says it is a Sabbath to the Lord, stopping from in order to orientate ourselves with God. As the week distracts us of work and priorities, it's the day to reprioritize, refocus, reorientate ourselves around God. It's why the Sabbath included synagogue. It's why the day of the gathered worship in church was the Sunday. It's not the only day, especially if Sunday can't be your day of rest, your day of Shabbat. But what distinguishes a Sabbath from a day off, particularly, is about being refocused around God. It's noticeable in our church culture. I've picked this up from other places, and especially since lockdown, that regular weekly committed gathering for corporate worship, Sabbathing to the Lord, has become almost like an option for a Sunday alongside sport, days out shopping, catching up on stuff, even working. We're trying to address this a little bit by having kind of evening worship times as well. But worship is not an optional life choice, but a fundamental part of our Christian lives, and particularly a distinguishing feature of Sabbathing. A Sabbath day of rest is meant to include delight in the Lord, worship. Matthew 11:28-20, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, from his pattern, for I am gentle and humble in heart." Hear this, "and you will find rest for your souls." Rest for your souls. Does that sound good? We're called to Sabbath, to stop, to rest, and to delight. And that sounds great in theory, but how do we do it? What makes a Sabbath? Well, the thing is, the irony of Sabbath is that it requires work, it requires effort, not as a reward, but as a rewiring. The writer of Hebrews in chapter 4, in verses 9-11 says, "There then remains a Sabbath rest for God's people, for anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest." Make every effort to enter God's rest. It requires effort. Why is that? Because it is actually going against the cultural flow of busyness and the encultured ideals and habits of keeping on going, of being productive above all else. It also requires choice and intentionality. Sabbath won't just happen. God had to command it. He wouldn't have had to if it was happening anyway. It requires planning and preparation alongside intentionality. In Jewish tradition, they had to kind of do all the meal prep so that everything was done in order for that day of enjoyment, to get stuff done ahead of time, which would facilitate Sabbath. Otherwise, it gets left until afterwards. The challenges of making effort in sharing the load in order for others to Sabbath too. Is a Sabbath really that holy if by you taking it means that others have to carry the burden? And it needs protecting and defending. There will be detractors and judgers that say, why are you doing that, when they're convinced of the cultural busyness being kind of more important. And it's also about our own tendency to drift. We need to protect and defend it ourselves and for one another. So how? What does it look like? Well, it's not legalistic or restrictive. Sabbath is meant to be a positive blessing. It's not meant to be a guilty thing, another thing to do to squeeze in. It's actually meant to be about demonstrating a better way to live. It's not a day off. Great as they are, there's so much more to Sabbath. And not everyone is the same. Different persons, personalities, we have different schedules and commitments, and indeed there are different seasons of life that might impact how and when we do Sabbath. School days, homemakers, unemployed or unable to work, those who are retired, full-time, part-time, all of these will impact our attitude and how we embrace sabbatical. J. John says, the rules of the Sabbath are gone, but the principle of the Sabbath remains. We have to have a Sabbath attitude. It's not less than 24 hours, it's so much more than it. Walter Brueggemann, again, in regarding Sabbath, said people who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. If we follow Sabbath, it breaks out into our entire week. And we need to find Sabbath moments in every day as we follow Jesus' example. We call them quiet times, mini Sabbaths, tasters for weekly Sabbath rest, which actually biblically and theologically, Sabbath is in fact a taster for the Sabbath rest that ultimately will be in eternity with the Lord. So I want to ask, if you had 24 hours to do whatever you could that would restore and bless you, that would draw your attention to the Lord and abiding in Him, what would you do? Go ahead, make a list. What would you do? Because the criteria, I think, of Sabbath are based around these things. To stop work, demands, wants, and pressures. To rest, what restores your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And to delight, to enjoy, for it to be a blessing to you and to bless others. To celebrate and feast and enjoy being in the Lord's presence. Some advice that I was given is to start where you're at. From no Sabbath, try using these principles and add them into a morning, an afternoon, a session. Critique your days off. Are they just recovery days, or are you having your soul restored? What would you do to abide in Him? And so rest well, Sabbath well, stop well, and delight well, and the ripples will roll out in your life, and I believe into the lives of those around us. Amen.